we need to engage because we forget the Afghans who are sitting inside that country.
We were very circumspect as far as our engagement with the Taliban was concerned. We actually shut our mission.
And the power in Afghanistan lies with the Pashtun tribes.
We have lost our ears and eyes on the ground, which is why we are losing on a lot of important intel that's coming out from that region.
India does have apprehensions regarding the Taliban, given the history of the group, given the proximity of the group to Pakistan.
As far as India's strategic interest was concerned, it was purely related more on security.
Re-engaging the Taliban. What's behind India's charm offensive? This week, while all eyes are on Hostage Square in Tel Aviv as families celebrate what they hope will be a ceasefire and a hostage swap that will finally end the misery on both sides, which could even bring President Donald Trump to Gaza. And of course, the historic visit to India by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer with a 100-member delegation, we take a close look at another development. Few visits by foreign dignitaries have set off as much of a buzz as the visit to India of the Taliban acting foreign minister Maulvi Amir Khan Muttaqi. This is the first official visit by a Taliban leader after the armed militia seized Kabul after the panicked withdrawal of American and foreign forces on August 15, 2021. Muttaqi was until last week banned from traveling to India. Not that he hasn't traveled out of Afghanistan before. Key member of the Doha Council that negotiated with the previous Ghani administration, he's met India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri in Dubai. He was an invitee to Beijing and to Russia. The Taliban, incidentally, are the only country to have backed India on Operation Sindoor, which probably invited the wrath of Pakistan, which chairs the United Nations Security Council Sanctions Committee and which reportedly banned Muttaqi's travel plans to Delhi first time round. Hello everyone, I'm Neena Gopal. Welcome to Global Express, where we look at the stories behind the news. This week, it's about re-engaging the Taliban and what's behind India's charm offensive. Please click on the New Indian Express and watch and share. On the panel today are three experts on Afghanistan. Professor Dr. Raghav Sharma is an associate professor and assistant dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. He had earlier taught in the Conflict Studies and Management program and the Good Governance Afghanistan program at the Willy Brandt School of Public Policy, University of Erfurt, Germany. He's also been associated with the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi. Welcome, Professor Sharma. Sameer Bhasin is a geopolitical analyst and a strategic affairs expert with very close links to Afghanistan, could go back over 30 years and continue to this day. He's a writer and commentator on developments in the AFPAC region. Welcome, Mr. Bhasin. Also with us is Ms. Nayanima Basu, independent journalist and author of this amazing book, The Fall of Kabul, Dispatches from Chaos, a first-person, eye-popping eyewitness account of the day the Taliban took control of the Afghan capital on August 15, 2021. Welcome, Ms. Basu. Let's start with what is being seen as India's biggest diplomatic gamble in recent times, inviting a representative of the Taliban regime to India, a regime that it had once been extremely critical of because it was seen as a Pakistan proxy, but has now steadily, step by step, built a relationship with. Professor Raghav Sharma, this seems like an India ready to re-engage with the Taliban, even endorse but not formally recognize, or is recognition on the cards? And the big question, will the Taliban be willing to play ball? What has changed the thinking in the inner circles of the Taliban in the minds of this aging leader, Haibatullah Akhundzada, a man who's said to be at least 70, rarely seen in public, but who reportedly conferred with Muttaqi in Kandahar before the foreign minister traveled to Moscow and to Delhi to lay down what he sees as acceptable to him. And curiously, one report says that Akhundzada did not clear Muttaqi's multiple requests to visit Pakistan earlier, but has now cleared Delhi and Moscow. So do tell us, what does Taliban seek to gain from talking to India?
Let me begin by pointing out that India was an outlier as far as engagement with the Taliban was concerned. This goes back way back to 2010, when you had the London conference, when it became apparent that, for the larger international community, the question was not if the Taliban would come back, but when, how, and in what form. So India was an outlier, and we were amongst the few countries that actually held out against negotiating with the Taliban for a fairly long period of time. We only sort of began recalibrating our position fairly late in the day as, the military ground in Afghanistan began to shift quite decisively in favor of the Taliban. Having said that, the current
Which year you're now referring to when the military shift happened in favor of the Taliban?
the military shift started happening about 2008 2009 onwards. They started gaining a lot of military momentum. Appeared on the scene earlier, but they acquired a lot of momentum essentially by the time the London conference took place in 2010, and it was a recognition of the fact that really the military intervention led by the US it had not quite panned out in the way that they had anticipated it would. And Afghanistan turned out to be far more complex than they had imagined it to be. Now, having said that, India was, of course, we recalibrated our position fairly late in the day. And when the Afghan Republic collapsed in 2021, our initial sort of reaction was knee-jerk and very checkered, in the sense that India initially announced e-visas for Afghans, then suspended those, didn't actually sort of go through on issuing those e-visas to the Afghan nationals. And we were very circumspect as far as our engagement with the Taliban was concerned. We actually shut our mission. The only countries that remained in Kabul were the BRICS countries, Pakistan, Iran, and China. But clearly, what has changed is that unlike the first period of Taliban rule, India has kept a channel of communication open with the Taliban, even when, our mission was not operational. We were sort of in communication with the Taliban. And clearly, what we've seen, I mean, this visit is a buildup of what has been in the works for quite some time, which is there has been a calibrated shift. We've had limited engagement with the Taliban. Um, Public engagements, of course, have been very low compared to countries like China that are leading the pack, or even Turkey. But there has been a calibrated shift. We have engaged the Taliban. So this is really a build-up of a process where there's been a very slow and calibrated shift in terms of engagement with the Taliban. And I think that slow calibrated shift stems from the fact that India does have apprehensions regarding the Taliban, given the history of the group, given the proximity of the group to Pakistan. But of course, the relationship between the Taliban and Pakistan is not a black and white relationship. It's
We'll come to that in a little while. But I also find that the Taliban is seeking to also make gains from talking to India. That's actually the curious shift that has happened.
It's not that curious in the sense that the Taliban essentially, of course, are far more savvy than they were in the 90s when they were first in power. The Taliban do want to also, this helps them play to their domestic gallery, that they're not puppets of the generals in Rawalpindi. This is essentially a critique of the Taliban that's been leveled against them by many of their opponents, including the Daesh. If you look at the propaganda that groups like the Daesh bring out, they essentially, have labeled the Taliban as puppets of foreign powers, including Pakistan. So it helps shore up their domestic legitimacy to a certain extent. It helps undercut criticism that they're essentially puppets of the Pakistani state, and it helps shore up their quest essentially to diversify the basket of diplomatic options that they have on the table, so to speak. So they are able to go back and say, hey, look, we do have a certain sense of strategic autonomy, and we are willing to walk the talk when it comes to engagement with India. And our engagement is going to be dictated by what we feel are our national interests. Also, I mean, something that was grapevine, but now reports are sort of coming in that the Daesh actually is Pakistan's team B.
Yes.
And this is something that was a rumor mill, so to speak. But now, this is something we heard a year earlier, and now we're hearing sort of reports surfacing that they're instrumentalizing the Daesh essentially against Baluch separatists and against incompatible factions of the Taliban to sort of bring them in line, because
Yes,
Taliban
that's right.
haven't agreed to everything that the Pakistanis have said. So, I think that the Taliban also stands to gain in terms of engagement with India. They also are able to demonstrate to the Pakistanis that we also wield some leverages against you, even
Yeah,
it is an asymmetrical relationship where Pakistan is the stronger party, quote unquote. But this also allows the Taliban to both play to the domestic gallery and diversify their basket of options and, send a signal to Pakistan.
that's
You know,
interesting.
it's not going to deter us from engaging with people who may be inimical to your interests.
Yeah. Mr. Bhasin, if I can bring you in, how does Delhi see the Taliban? Because Delhi does want to use this Taliban as, I think, a strategic counter to Pakistan. I mean, Muttaqi's travel ban by the United Nations Security Council Sanctions Committee, which is a committee which is chaired by Pakistan. So Pakistan initially blocked the ban from being lifted. And Kabul and Islamabad have had a major falling out, as Professor Raghav Sharma tells us. Firstly over the forced repatriation of thousands of Afghan refugees, and of course accusations it harbors anti-Pakistan terror outfits such as the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Resistance Front, and the fact that the virtually the Baluch Liberation Front operates, has a free run there. So has India won a promise now, an assurance from the Taliban that it will not allow Pakistan terror outfits to operate on Afghan soil? And can India take them at their word? Is the Taliban ready to cut these Pakistan terror outfits like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, Jamaat-ud-Dawa, and of course Daesh? Are they going to cut them down to size? Because one hears from Afghan insiders that Pakistan has turned a blind eye to Al Qaeda and ISIS, Khorasan, and Daesh. And another insider told me that the Uyghurs are being settled by the Taliban in huge numbers in the Panjshir Valley. As you and I both know, it was once the stronghold of the Tajik leader Ahmad Shah Massoud. So that is definitely not going to keep the Chinese happy, Mr. Basin.
Neena, just taking from Raghav, our engagement with the Taliban started while they were already in Doha, but it was not in the open. Okay? India saw, the writing on the wall that Taliban, is going to come to seat, and India's interest
Really?
was, although we didn't know whether it will be a complete takeover at that time or which looked
Power
more
sharing.
likely,
A
or
power
a
sharing.
or a settlement, intra-Afghan settlement, right? But it was very clear that without the U.S. security cover, the regime in Kabul was not sustainable with with the U.S. forces and the U.S. funding, right? The sustainability was, a question mark. Uh, uh, as far as India's interest there is concerned, I have been constantly saying I have a slightly different take on this. India historically has been, the people to be, we underplay, we talk about the politics, but India's goodwill with the Afghans when it is historical. Now, Pashtuns, which form 45% of the Afghan population, and Taliban is predominantly is controlled by the Pashtuns, right? And the power in Afghanistan lies with the Pashtun tribes, right? And they basically, if they were against this political whatever Taliban leadership, it was very difficult for them to sustain. And if you see the TTP, they draw same way. They when they go into Pakistan, they also have support amongst the Pashtun tribes on the other side of the Durand line, right? So we have to understand that very clearly. As far as India's strategic interest was concerned, it was purely related more on security. Means the foundation was the peoples to people ties across the board. And with the Pashtuns, we started with Khan Abdul Kawar Khan. That, frankly, even with the question we should ask is India that time, was sitting, it was not siding, but technically we were under the US security cover. So they still have the US pulled out, and now we see with Bagram how they are reacting to Trump's statement, right? But they look to India traditionally. So that foundation of our people to people tie is very important, right? Okay.
So this
Second
is
thing
one of the reasons.
is,
This is one of the reasons why you also openly backed the talks with the Taliban in the early in the
right.
when the Doha Council was Doha Shura
Yeah.
was talking
So that is
under.
on the Indian whatever you may call it security geopolitical level. One is the people's supply tie, which grows is cross cultural. Even serials like Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi were were the most popular programs, which were with my friend Abdullah Saleh of Kulu TV dubbed in
Really?
local news. It was like Ramayan was shown in India, where people would leave everything and go. Second thing you have to understand is the Taliban are follow the Deobandi school of which I've been saying earlier, and actually there are reports now that Muttaqui will be visiting the Deobandi
Deobandi school, yes,
through
in
their
UP.
seminary. Now you have to understand their seminaries, even if they go extremist, they need Deobandi is it was formed in India, right? So they would have more reverence to if even if they want to solve their whether it's women's rights issues or other issues under the Deobandi Hanafi school of Islam, right? Where we in India can on our Deobandi school can play a very important role to give them under the Deobandi Hanafi school of thought of how these issues should be addressed, okay, which we are doing, okay. As far as the security aspect of LET, Jaish-e-Mohammed and all, that is a mixed bag. I'll tell you. Currently, the ISKP, and I agree with Raghav, ISKP actually, and Amrullah Saleh used to say this in 2015, they came from the Levant region and they land in Langarhar on the uh, eastern side of Afghanistan, right? So they landed there, and that basically was we know the. So I don't want to go into the origin of ISIS, right? Who was behind it, right? So now, if
Why
anyone who
not?
understands that when it came on this side, like Raghav said, the purpose, and it is not an ISI phenomenon only. Whoever are the backers of ISIS who brought in there, ISI is a logistical support system to run the thing. And now we see the ISKP, and recently, I don't know whether you've seen reports, and the LET making an alliance because the TTP
Yes.
Baluch are there, okay? And the ISKP Mangal is being seen sitting down with President of. There are pictures of him sitting down with President Zardari, right?
Yeah.
So it is a very mixed bag. If you see when with Asim Munir, the CENTCOM chief said that there are phenomenal partners in countering terrorism, and they have been, a partner in fighting against ISIS in that region. At the same time, they're sitting with ISKP. So these guys, basically, these are, how do I say, these guys are turned around.
It's yes.
It's not a very fixed
Yeah, this it's
way.
not something which we can
So I
actually.
see now coming to Taliban on what they need from India, because with the pressure from the US and this Russian meeting is very important.
We'll talk about the Russian meeting in a minute, but could we just look at the fact that the way that Taliban was brought in to hold these talks with the Ghani government. That is something which a lot of us were quite shocked about, because I mean, not shocked but basically curious about, because you had the special envoy, U.S. special envoy Zalmay Khalilzad, bringing them in, helping set up the Doha Shura, and bring these negotiations with the Ghani government. What was it that prompted that? Is what I want to know. Was it the thousands of bombings and assassinations by the Taliban from almost 2002 to 2021 that gave them that?
Nina, the Doha process, if you remember, started during Karzai's time when the Doha allowed them to set up an office, and Karzai took a strong objection that why they were given, they still had the Islamic Emirate flag in there. This was, I think, around 2012. As far as the US is concerned, the stalemate between in Washington, the discussions on the future of Afghanistan and the continuous presence of, see, that is secondary, the intra-Afghan settlement is secondary. What drove the Doha process was the future of US in Afghanistan and the
Yes.
withdrawal of US in Afghanistan. Okay. So if you remember, in 12, Obama did a surge, and which they say in hindsight, which should not have been declared, because he thought by doing a surge, we'll probably get an outcome, instead of a stalemate. Either we'll win or lose, right? Sort of some outcome which will, break the stalemate. And then the 2014 withdrawal happened. This office and the discussions of withdrawal then took further, gathered further steam in 2015, right? In 2018, the famous five or the infamous five were exchanged for Baghdad, who was supposed to be a deserter, and brought in from Guantanamo Bay. Okay, and Mullah Brother, who was in prison in Karachi, in Pakistan, was taken to Doha. The same Mullah Brother was trying to make peace with Karzai, and that time it was not amenable in 2010, and which was not amenable to the powers to be, and he was picked up in Karachi and put in jail for 8 years. So he was picked up because he was Mullah Omar's deputy. He's the senior most leader in that way. He was brought as the chief negotiator to Doha. So the Doha process started, according to me, that reasons for that is not what I'm trying to say is the fundamental reason was not the inter-Afghan, that was secondary. Sadly, means people may not like it. But the main purpose of the Doha Accord was safe withdrawal of the US troops from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Okay. Then, so I'll quickly finish. Then intra-Afghan, they settled that first, and then intra-Afghan talks were supposed, and COVID also hit around that time. Because this deal happened, if you remember, 29th February 2020, which was the onset of COVID. And then there was a gap. And then around September of 2020, they again tried. And then there was a lot of, because of the Taliban kept saying, we'll call them the others. We don't recognize them as a government. So all this happened. And unfortunately, that settlement did not happen. And while even a smaller settlement was there, on 15th August, actually, President Ghani fled the country.
Correct.
Which sparked this. And Taliban basically, and I'll end quickly, they asked the general who was on the airport on Kabul to take over Kabul because there was a security vacuum of who will run Kabul when he fled at 10:30 in the morning. But which is on congressional hearings. He said, my mandate is only to secure Kabul airport. I cannot move into the city. And that's when the Taliban walked in.
Oh, that's very interesting, Mr. Bhasin. Very interesting. So, if I can bring you in, Ms. Nayanima Basu, I know you must have been asked this question over and over a million times, but to be present in Kabul when the Ghani dispensation fled, and the panic and the sheer chaos and mad scramble to get out that we all saw on TV that ensued, did anyone have an inkling that it was going to happen in the way that it did? And is there one single story of that nightmarish day that stays with you, Ms. Basu?
Well, thank you for having me on your show. And to answer that question, yes, I've been asked that several times. But then being on the ground and being in Delhi was very different at that point of time. And I was sitting in Delhi till 7th of August. It's on 8th morning I reached Kabul, and I realized the country is already over. I do not know what made the world think that there will be some kind of a power sharing deal that will happen. It was very clear by then, if you would have spoken to the Afghans on the road, and very much the common Afghans like you and me, and also outside of Kabul, which is why I traveled to Mazar-e-Sharif to understand what beyond the elitist circle in Kabul was thinking. It was very clear, and the writing was on the wall, that the Taliban is coming in, and that there was a massive ground support that they had been enjoying at that point of time.
That's
Which is
interesting.
why, yes, and which is why we would see how they got hold of provinces after provinces. We read all sorts of analysis and other kind of reportage on international media, but the scene on the ground was completely different. And the fact that there was this sense of kind of backstabbing, betrayal, that they thought the young generation there, so to say, who were born around 1998, 99, who really have not seen the previous Taliban and were grown up in this American sense of framework of mind, they really thought that there will be something that will happen, some magic in Doha that will be worked out. So yeah, and the fact that what we don't really discuss is how corrupt the Ashraf Ghani government was, and what kind of embezzlement that they have done as well. This is not to say that I would support what is happening there, but I think somewhere down the line, the world got very comfortable with the fact that there is a Dr. Abdullah doing something in Doha. Americans were doing something, but I guess we really should have seen what was happening when this was the very same Taliban negotiated with the Americans in Doha, and there was a so-called
So are you saying that Delhi didn't see this coming?
of course not. And that's what I have written in my book. Delhi never saw it coming. And even if they saw, they refused to acknowledge it. And, I was there myself on 14th of August. I was having an interaction with our officials there and also here as well. That what do you think is going to happen? Because 14th night is when everything was actually over. And at that point of time, nobody believed. They said, no, this everything will be normal. And we actually had an Independence Day celebration at our embassy, thinking that
For our
everything was
Independence
normal
Day.
outside the gates of the embassy, whereas everything was really over by then. Because on the 15th of August morning, I was out there on the road. I was going to interview Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, and I was in his office. Thankfully, I got the interview because it was early morning. But by the time I came out of his office, Kabul was over, right? And so, I mean, normal Afghan civilians, they were out there with their guns, whatever they had, pots and pans, traveling, just running on the road, what to do. Nobody was there to help them. So yes, those are the incidents that stay with me. And the fact that how, in the sense, the world sort of did not read it, but then whatever it is, we know what has happened. And today I think that reality has come into India's government sentiment that okay, probably we need to engage the Taliban now that they have 100% control over that country, compared to what it was last time you still had a hope, you still had a Panjshir Valley. Today all that is over. I hear that there is some kind of anti-Taliban grouping happening somewhere in Vienna, but unfortunately nothing is coming of all that. So the point is, recognition or not, we need to engage because we forget the Afghans who are sitting inside that country. We only listen to those who are outside the country, managing, their social media accounts very well and telling us what is happening. But we forget about the people who are still living inside, and they are living day in, day out under the Taliban regime, whichever way they're ruling the country. So I think instead of isolating them, it'll be good to engage with them and bring them on the track in the sense, what is a proper governance you can teach them. And of course, yeah, I mean, and also from India's perspective, there is a security concern that you have now. I mean, India has shut down all its consulates. Our mission is there running only on a skeletal support. We have lost our ears and eyes on the ground, which is why we're losing on a lot of important intel that's coming out from that region. So I guess this is a good step. But of course, this will go a long way in the sense it has to be gradual, and we need to see how it needs to be an inclusive government.
Yeah, okay. That's a good points actually, because all three of you believe that we should actually reach out. But since 2021, I mean, I'm sure all of you have tracked the Taliban's stranglehold over the women and girls. The very real danger that thousands of girls and women face on a daily basis. They have no prospects of leading a decent life. There's no access to education and healthcare. Is this a matter that India should take up with the Taliban government as a matter of some urgency, or would that be a deal breaker, Professor Raghav Sharma? Because also, what has happened simultaneously almost in the last couple of days is this internet shutdown. I mean, it's almost as if it's a repeat of what happened in Nepal. With some people saying that the Taliban actually tracked the messages going back and forth that hinted at a move to overthrow them. But the Taliban, of course, said that it was to curb immoral activities. But then why restore it in 72 hours? So is there anger among the local people, amongst the ordinary people, because there are no jobs, there is no employment? I mean, India is talking about investment and trade, but do we have any specific areas that we are talking about apart from training the Taliban militia?
Mhm. Well, a number of important points actually have been raised by both, I think, the panelists. And I think you also posed a very loaded question. Let's begin with the whole question of women and girls. It is undoubtedly an important question, I think, that ought to be tackled, but frankly, I don't think this is going to be very high on the agenda. That's the sad reality. And that is because, Taliban don't like being preached to. And all states in India, is no exception, are in a very transactional kind of relationship with the Taliban. Let's be also very clear that, human rights and women's rights were instrumentalized by the Americans to window dress their intervention in Afghanistan. And the way they exited has only discredited the whole idea of, outside actors lobbying for women's rights in Afghanistan. Um, look at the European Union. All the rhetoric on women's rights has really been watered down very significantly over the last 3 years. One must, of course, credit women in Afghanistan for speaking up against what the policies of the Taliban, and that's been one of the sticking points which has also held back the recognition of the Taliban regime on the international stage.
I
Uh,
see.
and I think Afghan women do deserve credit for putting up a very spirited kind of fight in this regard. But as far as I think the state is concerned, this is not something very high on the agenda of the state. Um, but this is a very troubling aspect of their rule, but not at all surprising, because if you look at areas that were already under Taliban control, way before the Taliban came to power, their attitudes to gender had not changed very significantly. There were schools in many parts of Afghanistan that were funded by the Afghan government, the republic, but the rules applied were those of the Taliban. You know, but having said that, the picture again, as far as women is concerned, is very patchy. A lot depends on what local commander is sort of in charge. I mean, friends I talked to in Kabul and other parts of the country till now, they said that, the one reason why, for example, online education, underground initiatives
Exactly.
educate women continue is because, some chaps in the regime just decide to look the other way. It's not as if they're not aware of what is happening, but they just decide to look the other way because they don't entirely agree with some of the diktats of the leader, but at the same time don't want to openly sort of disobey what's being stated by the leadership. So it's a very checkered picture. It's not so black and white, but yes, nonetheless, life for women has changed, and it's changed for the worse, and that's a real very real sort of fact. But I don't think India is going to take it up. None of the states have taken it up. I mean, the CCP, which used to talk about women holding up half the world sky, is happy to dance with the Taliban today, and they don't utter a word about women, nor do any other countries. And that's because this is a transactional relationship. With regards to, I think, as Sumeer raised very important points in people-to-people contacts. Yes, they're important. They're a very important foundation of the India-Afghanistan relationship, and undoubtedly, India enjoys a special place in the Afghan mind and in the Afghan hearts. But having said that, one must admit that the way we did a volte-face on the visa policy has dented some of that goodwill. So it's not been completely eroded, but it has taken a hit. And India will have to work very assiduously, essentially, to address that particular aspect of goodwill, so to speak, amongst the Afghans. And reviving people-to-people contacts really is going to be the only way forward. But that is again going to be not very easy, because India, of course, does have genuine security concerns as well in terms of issuance of visas. But the one thing that actually is not talked about very much, which has security implications, and that stems from, education. Yes, women have been denied access to education, but what about the boys? What is the kind of education they are getting in schools in Afghanistan? There have been changes in the curriculum in Afghanistan, and they have not been for the better. So, what kind of generation is going to come out of those schools? What we've also seen is a spike in madrasas across the.
Yes, 3,000 of them have been built in recent months.
So you're going to have a completely different generation coming out. So which country would really be receptive to receiving this young population. But that's going to be a challenge, and that's going to be a huge ideological challenge. And I don't think enough thought has been given to that, and that's something the region at large will have to grapple with in a couple of years from now. I'm sorry, I forgot the last part of your question.
No, no, I was just talking about India's, India and Afghanistan now, India and the Taliban, Emirate of Taliban, basically looking at investment and trade because there are very alarming statistics on the growing unemployment rates,
You
poverty.
were asking if there's anger because of this. Yes, the Afghan economy is not in great shape. There are challenges in terms of generation of jobs. There is also some degree of corruption, although not on a similar scale like you had in the Republic, but there is corruption in the Taliban as well. But having said that, I think while there is anger, people also know that alternatives are few. The opposition really, is not a force that's been able to get its act together or acquire any serious or meaningful momentum in the Afghan context. And, while Nayanima, I think, very rightly raised the point of political inclusivity, which itself is a very debatable kind of term, a loaded term. What do we mean by inclusivity? Which has created questions of legitimacy around the Taliban, but the opposition also has its own crisis of legitimacy in a sense that, a lot of the chaps who were in the opposition, were seen as very unsavory figures for a variety of reasons, mired in corruption. So the opposition hasn't really gotten off the ground. So there is no
There's
alternative
no voice, there's no
leadership,
voice.
voice to the angst of the people.
Yeah.
For instance, I asked some of my friends, as to why the Hazaras are putting up with some of the policies of the Taliban, such as eviction from land. And, I quote him verbatim. He said, the Hazaras say that Daesh हमें तालिबान हमें इंसान नहीं मुसलमान नहीं समझते and Daesh हमें इंसान नहीं समझते. So we are literally, caught between the frying pan and the fire. And we don't
Wow.
really have any leadership to give vent to our grievances. There's also a lot of war weariness amongst the population. Remember, this is very different from the 90s when you had an opposition that sort of clung on to about 10% of the territory, and it was kept going. It was kept going by, Russia and India and Iran. That is not the case today. And without that coming to fruition, I don't see the opposition actually acquiring any meaningful traction. And there is no alternative in terms of leadership.
Yeah,
What you've had is people gravitating to groups like the Daesh for a
correct.
multitude of other reasons. But apart from that, and whatever civil society resistance was there, I mean, look at Matiullah Vesa, for example, somebody who campaigned extensively for girls' education, something as simple as that, completely non-political. He's completely silenced. And by the way, he's a graduate of Jamia. He was
Oh,
quite disappointed at the fact that India just there was studied silence from Delhi completely. So this is a transactional relationship, and India is not an exception. All
yes.
are engaging in a very transactional manner with the Taliban. I mean, let's not forget Germany, which is a leading power in the European Union, has just handed over the Afghan consulate to the Taliban, and their flag has been raised in Berlin and Bonn. Uh,
Yes.
that's how it is.
Yeah. Mr. Bhasin, if I can come to you, India was one of the first countries to build, it built the first hospital in Kabul, if I remember. I remember visiting it years and years ago. They invested in mines, they built the parliament, and what is stopping them from now taking that forward? Do you think that this meeting now between Muttaqui and Shankar will yield some actual, trade and investment opportunities? Do you see any of that happening, or is that still in the realm of,
So, Nina, there are three ways of looking at it. Three issues when you have to increase your aid, right? One is, there is like Raghav said, he calls it transactional, but I call it a tacit recognition because even our Beyond News said India has recognized, but India accepting being part of the 10-member Moscow format where Taliban's flag was put up. In fact, there is a thing going on. I'm reading with the MEA that whether they will allow the Indian flag to be put when
Yes, that's
tomorrow
very interesting.
Jaishankar, because they have not
They'll
allowed
probably
that.
have they'll probably have no flags at all, like last time.
No, they can't do that because it's in our soil. So they'll have to. It's not that easy. That's what they did. Because when they met in Dubai also, I think the flag was there. So that these are things. So that tacit. There are two things, which is more a diplomatic, with conventional diplomacy. How do you perceive that? That is one issue, and I'm talking in terms of growing of it. Second is the security aspect of it. That how much of because right now, please understand, earlier when the US and other donors were coming in, there was money in the economy, right? Because all those donations and the government getting money, the size of the economy was larger.
And the UN was operating as well.
Right.
Now the women are being blocked from going back to their United Nations offices in Kabul.
Yeah. So that economic aspect India has to consider. One is the diplomatic, then the aspect of with the viability of projects and the capacity of the government or whoever to whether to sustain it. Third aspect, very important, is the US sanctions, because that I call it a logistical constraint, because right now we see what has happened in Chabahar. Again, they've withdrawn the carve out.
But they've given us, haven't they given us a window till October 28th in Chabahar?
No, I didn't hear that.
Yes, they have. They've given us a window till October 28th to, so I think the Taliban will probably have to find a way, that India and the Taliban will have to find a way to be able to transport goods through Chabahar till October 28th. And
I
after that,
I'm,
then of course,
I'm
it'll become
no, I'm
impossible.
sorry, I didn't read that, but I don't know what that means. October 28th is the extension of the carve out, or to withdraw your
It is.
investment or whatever, right? So if it is good news. If it is extension of the carve out, the other thing happens is the banking channels, because when you have donors and these projects, etc. So there are two sanctions: the Iranian sanctions and some sanctions on Afghanistan. Although I'm aware that I also transacted business post Taliban. I did some dry fruit business. So I send money to Kabul in US dollars from Punjab National Bank here for import of certain things. So it works, right? And then capacity. Indians will have to go on ground, because who will, means do the execute these projects. So those things have to be addressed. But I feel India should. My view is, I was involved with the Haji Gak project. India should look at not just donation projects. If you need sustainable economic development, you have to look at large footprint projects which are sustainable, where it's not pre-check, and the Afghans want that. You invest in infrastructure and you basically do a commercial project, to sustain the Afghan economy, because India is a large market. That is what will create the linkages. Because see, if you do these kind of, like we built Salma Dam, or you quoted the parliament, etc. When you do it and hand it over to them, it's sustaining it without generating any money is very, very, very difficult. So if you have to grow their economy, you have to provide more jobs on a sustained basis. You have to basically engage in a public-private partnership or do something with the plan. So that's what I feel, India should do. And India has, not only in capacity, market, we have all the, pull, what I call the demand factors to do that. That is
Yeah.
establishes our strategic presence in the region. Taking from just on the education issue, that is not a closed book. I agree with Raghav, but one thing I would like to add to that. So between the Mullah brother and Akhundzada, this is basically, that is they don't want to fight over it beyond the point, but there are disagreements in Kabul. Like he stated in a different way, that local commanders, why they don't allow it, because they know the view of Kabul on those issues, so they know they can allow it to happen without administrating the strict
I
rules.
see. Yeah, correct.
Because Kabul administration, they know their views, which have come out very publicly. In fact, Mullah brother made a statement. I have written that without knowledge, and he's equated girls and women, you cannot grow. And he said both men and that means men and women have to be given knowledge. So that I think India should, which I said earlier, use, because if you have to address this on a religious basis strictly, You have to use scholars in India, the Deobandi school, to interpret it as per in the religious context to them. Western context will not do it because Western. Sorry, there's your women. I remember means just to quote quickly, Mullah brother was asked with this by Zal. That what is your view on women's rights?
As
So
in
he said,
Zalmay Khalilzad.
yeah, and he said, do you want our women to be in bikinis like you have posters on the buses in London? See, when the West comes and says it, that is a ultra liberal form of this thing. Though when you go into an Afghan and say that, he gets scared because you are heading towards that sign. And even in the 70s, so you'll have to moderate that expectation, and
Yeah.
there are two things: the pride and what level of liberalization, right, and how it is interpreted. So this is a discussion which is, I think, in one of our previous podcasts with you, there was a lady who said this discussion is already going on amongst Afghans.
That's
Okay,
good. That's good.
so it is not that it's stuck in stone. It will socially, they will have to move in that direction. It is a question.
Fine. Yeah. In the question, in time, they will probably have to evolve. Yes. But Miss Basu, Muttaqi's 5-day visit will see him visit Hyderabad and Mumbai as well. Where Afghanistan has got consulates. I mean, Mumbai apparently is part functioning. And because after this, the reports that I'm hearing that Afghans are getting visas to visit India not just for medical treatment and not just student visas. Dozens of businessmen and traders are coming through. And if Kabul does get their Delhi mission up and running, would that be, a good thing? I mean, do you think that a de facto recognition of of the emirate and maybe the former ambassador returning? I don't think that's possible. But even then, it's a good. Is that a step in the right direction?
Well, yes, of course. As I said that, more you engage the Taliban, more you can, talk about some of the difficult issues, like, of course, the Afghan women education. But then this is too early to discuss all that with Muttaqi. For now, it will be definitely on resumption of visas, which has started, but not really. Resumption of visas is the thing that needs to start. And of course, Afghan traders had been coming in and out because of the fact that trade is an important issue for us, and we are staring at a big challenge when it comes to Chabahar. Maybe we've got a leeway for a certain days, but that really does not help, so to say, because this comes under secondary sanctions, India buying Russia and all. That's a different geopolitical dynamics that's working out all there. And also, let's not forget the fact that we are also leveraging on Afghanistan's problems with Pakistan at a time when we are also actively engaged in a military sort of intervention with Pakistan. We keep on saying that Operation Sindoor is on. And so it helps us in both ways, so to say. Coming to the consulates, well, the Mumbai consulate, I was recently there. It is up and running very much. The old embassy support stuff is back and they're working. The embassy here in Delhi is also operating well. Uh, the issue is only about the flag, but we already had some of the Taliban officials coming, taking control and taking some of the decisions of issuing visas and all that. So again, this is what the visit will definitely smoothen these things out, but these were happening. Our foreign secretary was in Dubai meeting Muttaqi, and since then the momentum really, it gained a lot of momentum. Having said that, again, I strongly believe that yes, if there is an anti-Taliban force taking birth somewhere, we need to support that as well. But end of the day, Afghanistan is your neighborhood. You need to also engage the Taliban, especially because India is now in a very difficult neighborhood. And I really wonder who is our friend in the neighborhood now that we can really say is India's friend. And that was kind of, we saw that during Operation Sindoor. We may not need a friend, that's what we hear. But end of the day, the reality is, end of the day, is that we do not have anyone support, so to say, who will boldly come and support India like the way we saw China supporting Pakistan. So I guess all these factors have come into play to understand, oh, really, this is now the time to engage the Taliban. And the fact that there are several Afghan students there, medical patients who really need to come to India, and you cannot shut the doors that the way we have done, in the most heartless manner, I would say. And I had been writing and reporting on this constantly, that you cannot and you should not have revoked those visas like that. Afghan students, some of them way back in 2021, they lost their full academic year. They had
Yeah.
got admissions in several Indian colleges and universities. They could not come in because of the very fact that we thought, okay, here is a Taliban, and maybe every single student can be a Taliban. You never know what's working. And that's again also because we did not read what was there writing on the wall. We did not believe the intel that was coming in. I guess now probably we are doing some course correction, but while doing that course correction, we should not forget that there is an opposition also that is there somewhere against the Taliban, and we need to be aware of all the sides.
So basically, we should talk to all sides. Professor Raghav Sharma, if you could come in, did you want to comment on any of these points that Mr. Bhasin made, or can I ask you the big question, which I'm dying to ask? But go ahead.
Very quickly point out. So yes, Nayanima, I agree with what Nayanima said, that we should be talking to all sides. The Pakistanis are quoting all sides. They've tried to flirt with the NRF. Its credibility is wobbly, but they're doing it. The point is that being an important regional player, and we say that we are important. Actually, we're nowhere when it comes to conversations in Afghanistan. Turkey is far more active in essentially cultivating people from all sides of the political divide. So we've not been there. In fact, people who came after 2021, many of them, we just actively shunned them and told them to go find a place in a third country. So I think that's a mistake that we made. We should be talking to everybody. It doesn't necessarily mean that you go and support an armed opposition, but we need to be having more conversations on Afghanistan. We are not doing enough of that. I think Sumeer also.
The elephant in the room, Professor Raghav Sharma, is Ahmad Shah Massoud's son.
Well, little Masood is not, he's not the same as his father.
He doesn't have the same charisma.
Villain. He doesn't have the same charisma. He's not cut his teeth in the field the way his father had. His uncles are a liability for a multitude of reasons. And again, Sam would know more about it, but apparently little Masood and Saleh are also not on the best of terms with each other. What I heard from my friends in the opposition, there is some degree of friction. At one point, they were not even talking to each other. So there are problems in the opposition. A lot of the leaders who've parked their money abroad, and are sitting in third countries, have been told, you enjoy your holiday. Don't do anything very much. So there are serious problems in the opposition. But the point I'm making is, talking to all sides means not just people from the so-called NRF or AAF, but also civil society actors, academics, people from cinema, opinion people in the diaspora, and some of them were very active to actually set up base in India. That's true. But not only did we shun them thereafter, if you look at any major conference in Afghanistan, India has not been there. I mean, we're just not there. So instead of being invited to a Moscow format, we should have also been somewhere on the scene trying to set the
For a Kabul format.
So that has not happened. I think on the important point that was raised by Sam on using religious scholars, uh, I don't know. I mean, it is a good point. It's an important point, but how receptive the Taliban would be remains to be seen. You had very recently the Taliban publish a gazette in July 2024. And one of the Taliban ministers, Sheikh Mohammed Khalid Hanafi, recently issued a statement, I think 2 days ago, where he's challenged global Islamic scholars to contest the vice and virtue law of the Taliban. Saying that I challenge them to show that the law is against the Hanafi school of jurisprudence, so to speak. Yes, I think it's important. I think Sam makes an important point that you essentially use the same turf to build a counter narrative and engage them. But how receptive they would be remains to be seen.
That's very interesting. The third aspect to this Muttaqi trip is, as we earlier mentioned, Russia's role. I mean, this was a major diplomatic shift, Muttaqi taking part as an official delegate of the Taliban led interim government. So, this is the first time the group has been formally included in the Moscow format in the forum since it came back to power in 2021. So, and the Taliban minister Muttaqi's participation, which of course preceded his arrival in Delhi, was also accompanied in July by this official recognition of the Taliban emirate in July by Russia. So, Mr. Bhasin, do you see this as a diplomatic turning point? Because Russia is right now the only country to have recognized the Taliban emirate. And I mean, to give our viewers some background, the Moscow format didn't, was set up in 2017. So what is Moscow's role in Afghanistan? Did the Soviet Union start off by backing them against the Mujahideen? I mean, but the Taliban, as we all know, was created by Pakistan. So there's an inherent contradiction here, don't you think, with the support that Russia is now giving the Taliban?
Russia is part of they see Afghanistan not in isolation as part of the larger geopolitical game. When they lost Syria, they look at America's presence in the region, and they are coordinating with China and because the Pakistan, the dynamics are, because even the Pakistan, we know the Pakistan-Afghanistan relations, how they are. So Russia saw a vacuum to come in, and they basically sent their former defense minister to Kabul, okay, to engage and meet the Taliban. And there is a podcast where they are asked that, you were, earlier we had that, the Russian episode. So, and the answer was to that was Soviet Union, we are Russia, right? When they were addressed this question that, you invaded our country, and how do you look at Afghans now? So they look at Afghanistan in the larger geopolitical mix as a strategic location to increase influence there, okay? And they saw this opportunity that, because like Raghav also said, transactionally, tacitly, everyone is accepting it. With factually everything is happening, right? There may not be
The Moscow format also included the Central Asian states of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. That was also very interesting, Mr. Basin.
And also Belarus, by the way.
And Belarus, yes.
Right. So they had 10 countries, okay? The default lines there are India, Pakistan, and Pakistan, Afghanistan, okay?
Exactly.
Which is sort of a tenuous relationship, to say the least, but the rest are aligned on the Afghan strategy, and you have Afghan so they basically moved ahead to see that space, because they know the US has withdrawn. US is not going to come and put boots on the ground and come back over there. That is out of the question. So that even is related to this inclusive government thing, because most of the Mujahideen, erstwhile Mujahideen, which Raghav stated, this is connected. Although Pakistan tries to go and reach out to them and, does that to, they've reached out to them in Turkey and all that. But basically that was US funding which created them. So without a major source of funding, they on their own don't have the wherewithal to fight without resources, because they've always been backed by foreign powers to fight within Afghanistan. They themselves do not have the wherewithal to withstand. And the US also has very clearly said that they have no tolerance for any resistance against Afghanistan, against the Taliban. Okay. So Russia saw this opportunity. And also I would like to add, so Zal, when he started the Doha process, if you remember, in this, like you rightly said, the Moscow format started in 17. He allowed this engagement of the Taliban with, they didn't travel to India, but they went to China, they went to Iran, they went to Moscow, right? So that engagement of the Taliban started with these capitals way before the Doha deal. Okay, in the run-up to the Doha deal, so they could, address their issues, thinking that they're coming to power. Today, Russia sees that in the geopolitical play of its influence in the region and pulling, and it sees, and by the way, I spoke to some people in Kabul. So there, the sense I got, people within the system, that how are they looking at this trip? So they are perceiving that they look at India as a positive force, but they're looking at India also. It's not that Afghans are also not looking at India in isolation. See, today, because of the geopolitical shifts, those prevail in any decision-making process of how the world will pan out geopolitically. So that's what is Russia's view. That's also what the Taliban's view is. They see the India-Pakistan divide. They see the US, India. They basically went, and Russia basically used that Moscow format to openly make a statement to the US that there's no tolerance of these talks by Trump to take over
Take
Baghdad,
Bagram.
which China has also opposed. Okay, so that shows that China and Russia are and India are going to means probably form some sort of understanding. Because from Russia point of view, it has strategic security concerns and narcotics and all that, but it doesn't see itself as a major. Although they say we want to invest, they may invest in infrastructure, but they are not a big market. India is the only big market for the mining sector, for the Afghan products, for their agricultural products, and all that. Okay, so right now so that's what Russia wants to probably give that security, because the US security has gone off Afghanistan. When we operated earlier, it was basically US security or Western
That's true.
coalition.
The French
So
troops
Russia
and
sees
all
that
were there
presence
too.
because they are,
British.
like you rightly said, they have their presence till the CS countries. Okay, so that allows via Chabahar for India to basically render and under some sort of Russian guarantees. Because if I'm not saying they'll put boots on the ground, but some sort of security architecture has to be built to secure this.
That's very interesting. So basically, we can bypass Chabahar and probably use the Central Asian states to, or we have to use Chabahar to for that north-south corridor. Yeah, Miss Basu, if I can come to you, the other interesting aspect to all of this is this critical question which I have, is Russia drawing India further into its orbit, because it's firming up this geopolitical balancing act that everyone's talking about that pits Russia and China against the United States. Now, alongside Afghanistan, Iran, and the Central Asian states, and is India, Miss Basu, you think, playing along?
Well, I think Russia loves to play this role that it has been playing. And let's not forget when India was having issues with China during the 2020 standoff. At that time, also, Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi were meeting in Moscow, and there was a Moscow dialogue happened at that time. So I think Russia does that for India because of the fact that we are close strategic partners, but also, let's not forget there was an Istanbul process, the heart of Asia, that started in 2011, of which India played a key role, and India had hosted some of the ministerials, I remember. But somewhere down the line, that also, India could not take that further beyond a point, and that's also because we stopped talking to Pakistan. Somewhere down the line, I think we believe in the fact that terror and talks cannot go together. But now that you're engaging with the Taliban, there will be questions raised as to what is it that India really believes in. And of course, coming to the Russia question, it has been happening for a long time. It's not that the Russians did not approach us, it did, but we've been always in this thinking mode as to what is it that we need to do, which will be politically correct, because there is, of course, a domestic audience that is staring at the government. And that is the challenge that this government faces, how to keep domestically everything hunky dory, right? So that's, of course, another challenge that we face. But again, as I said, that this is probably the time when India can leverage this visit and say that here we are engaging with the Taliban, taking that risk, getting all sorts of criticism. And again, there will be criticism also happening that these days India is also blamed for not taking a stand, so to say, whether it's a Russia-Ukraine war or a, Israel-Gaza war. So I guess somewhere down the line, we need to define our foreign policy. We cannot be seen as talking to the Taliban because the Russians dragged us into it, or talking to somewhere because, because the Americans have told us to do that. Again, going a little further away from the subject, look at what we are doing even in the Indo-Pacific. Now that the Americans have stopped talking about Indo-Pacific, we have stopped talking about Indo-Pacific as well. And you never know whether the Quad Summit will at all take place or not, going by the tensions we are having with the Americans. So I guess somewhere down the line, it all falls into one category as to what India needs to do with its foreign policy. You cannot be seen every time that you are doing certain things because somebody else has told you, whether it's your strategic partner, your friend, or whichever word you need to use. Because if you are really practicing strategic autonomy, then it's going to be very difficult for you to really walk the tightrope.
That's very interesting. Professor Sharma, if I can come back to you, would you like to comment on this, on the Russian game?
Well, I think Russia sees, Russia basically is worried about two things: spillover of radical ideologies, and they see the Taliban as an effective bulwark against groups like the Daesh. So they're worried about, spillover into Central Asia, which is more integrated with Afghanistan than it was in the 90s. And the other concern, of course, they have is narcotics. And they clearly also, I believe, are not in favor of the Taliban falling decisively under American influence. So they are keen essentially to make sure that they are able to essentially project their influence in order to secure what they believe are some of the most pressing challenges, and narcotics and essentially radical ideology is something that they view with concern. The irony is that actually all major states in the region have security concerns related to Afghanistan. There's a broad convergence on that front, but there's a huge divergence when it comes to what are these security threats and what are these priorities. The Chinese are more worried about groups like the Uyghurs, and I believe the Chinese, to a certain extent, have blown that out of proportion. They've magnified the threat than what larger than what it actually is on the ground. But nonetheless, they remain focused on that. But they're happy essentially to, protect Pakistan's strategic assets in the region by ensuring that they're not sanctioned through UN mechanisms. The West is largely focused on Al Qaeda and other such groups. And groups like the Lashkar or the Jaish, other regional groups that are more oriented towards the subcontinent seem to escape their attention, which is where our interest sort of lies. So yes, security is a challenge, but all states have different yardsticks when it comes to dealing with these groups, particularly Pakistan and China.
Yeah. No, and just to wrap up, if you can make concluding remarks, I can see that the military and strategic alliance that the US has built with India to build India into a great power that balances China in Asia, that seems to be unraveling. And, Muttaqi's visit, India visit, is being billed as a diplomatic big breakthrough, a milestone, a signal, messaging that India is a new game in town. I mean, it's no longer just hedging its bets, it's making it very clear that it does intend to go ahead and probably strengthen its relationship with countries that will challenge Pakistan's writ as it gets Washington's blessing in more ways than one. So would you like to comment on that, Mr. Bhasin, and then Ms. Basu and Professor Sharma, in
So,
quickly, if you don't mind?
my view is always from geoeconomics and geopolitics. US under Trump, under MAGA, I see most likely a G2 kind of world emerging. They are renegotiating their terms of trade and renegotiating the value of the dollar. Means they're devaluing it. So they have an internal economic dynamic, and they are renegotiating their way with China, in which they would basically, whether you look at the Middle East and other places, okay, they would basically not look at India's concerns. See, India's after Galwan, let's be very practical. They saw that India got engaged in comparatively a small area, and had and was under huge pressure from the Chinese, okay, with all or wherewithal. So they saw that, how practical it is to, like the speaker mentioned earlier about Quad. They don't see India any longer as a strategic partner as far as the US-China equation is concerned, right? If you see there, that's why they are propping Pakistan and Bangladesh and other areas to create irritants. Although Pakistan is a mixed bag because they are on both sides between China
That's true.
and the US. But then Asim Munir is offering that whatever that new port is offering, and he carries
Pasni.
or doing and hedging that, because that's what Pakistan has done. On the Bangladesh side, the creating takeover of trying to take over Saint Martin Island. So there, that rivalry is playing out on both our borders, and we just saw what happened in Nepal. What I have from close sources in Nepal saying that uh, uh, rumors are that the cabinet is being decided in the US embassy. The point is,
Oh.
uh, you know, so they have basically created irritants around. I would say they have sort of pivoted on that strategy to create more problems of China in the South Asian part by these smaller players than taking China head on uh, in conjunction with India.
Yeah, yeah. No, also we are now putting all our eggs in the Kandahar lobby basket, because there is talk that Sirajuddin Haqqani has reportedly gone into hiding after his uncle was killed. He's in Khost. So there are various factions within the Taliban also. Miss Basu, there's Mullah Umar's son, there's Mullah Mutawakil, there's Sirajuddin Haqqani, there is Mullah Baradar. So, and now also Anas Haqqani, who's could be a Pakistan proxy.
Well, yes, you are right. And of course, I mean, I was also trying to bring in the Haqqani network factor. Let us not forget that there were a challenge, and that's the reason why at that point of time on 16th of August, we had to shut down the embassy. India did, because there was a threat from the Haqqani network. But I guess over this many months and years, there had been some kind of conversation happening, which I get to hear from some of my very reliable sources, is the fact that we have opened some kind of a back channel with Sirajuddin Haqqani, Anas Haqqani, and the fact that we've got assurances from them in the sense, whatever is India's concern as far as cross-border terrorism is also concerned, and the fact that Afghanistan will never again be a breeding ground for either the Jaish or the Lashkar-e-Toiba, right? And that remains India's topmost priority and topmost concern, so to say. So yes, I guess all those dialogue is going on, within which the Taliban is trying to leverage that opportunity and look into a kind of diplomatic recognition. So only time will see. Will see what kind of outcome will be after this visit, and how much and we are able to normalize our ties with Afghanistan, which is highly needed. And again, I guess. This is probably the time when maybe looking at what China is doing, because China goes a certain step ahead, and then we get this inferiority complex all the time. Oh, look, China has done it, so we miss the bus all the time. So maybe we will now probably try and appoint an envoy. I do not know if the previous ambassador is going to come back. Looks very difficult considering the kind of charges that had been,
Farid
put on him,
Mamunzai.
Farid Mamunzai. I do not see. And what I get to hear from some of my sources within the Taliban network is the fact that they would also not want him to be sitting in Delhi. Although I do not know whether the Indian government would want him back, for all that they say he's run away with money. Nobody knows the truth. Nobody knows what has really happened.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
yeah, having said all that, I guess probably now we will see ties normalizing. But again, there is an American factor, the Chabahar factor. How much can you normalize also remains to be seen. How Iran now takes a call, and we need to work with all our stakeholders the way we did in Russia now. Signing the joint statement, agreeing to the fact that yes, in a way, we are kind of recognizing the Taliban, if not officially, but through over multilateral forums.
That's very well put. Professor Raghav Sharma, do you have concluding remarks on whether India is reversing years of isolation and turning to diplomacy now to yield results?
Well, very quickly, yes, we have had a calibrated shift and a ramping up of the relationship. This is really a recognition of the prevailing realities on the ground, and this is something India will have to do if it has to secure its interests. But also building on that, I think what we should learn from our past engagement is that we should be talking to all stakeholders across all divides and not be putting all our eggs in one basket as we did with Ghani or Karzai or with Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh. Or with Kandahar now, and the whole, I mean, our whole intervention post 2001, it was predicated on an American presence, and America under Trump has become increasingly unpredictable. The other thing to keep in mind is that, yes, I mean, there's been a lot of talk in the Indian media about, how the Taliban have been supportive of India's position against Pakistan in the aftermath of Pahalgam, and this is a breakthrough. Yes, it is a breakthrough. It is an important milestone, no doubt. But I think it will be in our interest not to sort of project this relationship only through the prism of Pakistan, because this is only going to strengthen the discourse that India is interested in Afghanistan because of Pakistan, and Afghanistan becomes a proxy battleground for shadow boxing between India and Pakistan. That doesn't really go in our interest as far as narrative building is concerned. So we need to essentially distance ourselves from that prism and create really meaningful traction for our presence, which would be through projects, which would entail, as was pointed out by one of the speakers, by putting people on the ground to implement those projects. But I think the biggest and most potent instrument for change, positive change, would be through education. How that would have to be recalibrated in light of prevailing realities in the ground, and I don't think we have time for it. So.
Yeah, well, I think in conclusion, I'd like to ask, whether warming up to the Taliban as we are doing now will even also impact India-US ties. That's not quite clear how that would play out because of that comment that has been made about Bagram, at the Russia format, at the Moscow format in Russia. But I must say that it's a diplomatic gamble that is still in its very early stages. This is an India that is re-engaging with a group that it had vilified, scorned, and blamed for a multitude of sins, including the bombing of its embassy in Kabul alongside Pakistan's ISI and the Kandahar hijacking of IC 814 in 1999. So the stakes couldn't be higher. Building leverage is one thing, but can the Taliban really be trusted to protect Indian interests? We'll have to wait and see. Thank you, Professor Raghav Sharma. Thank you, Mrs. Amir Bhasin.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Nayanima Basu, for coming on the show. Thank you, viewers. Do click on the new Indian Express website and watch and share Global Express.